I want to preface this video with a bit of personal philosophy, if I might. In spite of the name of the video, it's my view that even mistakes in life often have their benefits in the long term. When it comes to buying watches, if I end up with something that I don't like, I try to learn from that for future purchases. And just like life itself, I think of it as a journey I'm on, rather than dwelling on the idea of regret. Having said that, there are still plenty of things that you can try to do to guard yourself from making mistakes in the first place. And as a man who has made countless horological missteps, I thought I would try and share some advice with you to try and prevent you from making the same ones. With all that said, let's get into the video. If you've watched one of my videos before, you'll know that I often say dimensions are king. They should be your very first point of consideration when buying a watch, because just like everything else you wear on your body, if it doesn't fit, it isn't going to be comfortable and it isn't going to look right. Before you think about getting to know what watch dimensions suit you best, you need to start with a good understanding of the dimensions of your wrist. Taking a measurement is obviously one way of doing it, but some people have much thicker wrists than others, and a lot of the time, comfort when wearing a watch comes down not to the measurement around the wrist, but across it. Lug to lug is a key consideration here, and if you've heard people discussing how a watch wears bigger or smaller than its dimensions indicate, it's often because of lug to lug, which is essentially the full length of the watch before its bracelet or strap begins. If that lug to lug measurement is close to or beyond the width of your wrist, you're going to end up with overhang and the watch is going to look like it doesn't fit you properly. One thing to look out for when buying an integrated bracelet watch in particular is whether or not the first links are flexible. If they aren't, then you should include that in your effective lug-to-lug considerations too. I've run into these issues several times with my PRX, my F77 and my Urban Flygraph. Other important dimensions to consider are height and diameter. For me, I prefer smaller dials on watches, so my aim is to only buy things between 36 and 40mm in diameter. But if I'm honest, the lower the number is in that range, the better, as even 40mm can feel a bit too big for me now. As for height, close to or less than 10mm is absolutely ideal for daily wear. It just means that you can use the watch for more occasions, as it'll work with formal workwear. If you've got something at 14 or 15mm and beyond on your wrist, it isn't going to fit neatly under a cuff, and it's going to be heavier and bulkier to wear for long periods of time. My exception to all of this is watches you wear when you're being active. My go-to when running or swimming would always be a G-Shock, because I want to be able to check the time at a glance, not interrupting my flow. I personally find deeper fitness tracking to take some of the enjoyment out of exercising. But if it's for you, there are plenty of G-Shocks that will do that for you without having to buy a smartwatch that you constantly have to charge. Generally speaking, if you want a metal bracelet for your watch, the cheapest time to buy it is when it comes shipped with the watch itself. In most cases, you'd have to be buying a very well-made strap or one produced from exotic materials to get anywhere near the same kind of cost as you'd pay for a bracelet separately. In a lot of cases, you'd be better off buying the watch on a bracelet, and then if you don't like the look or feel of it on wrist, selling the bracelet and buying a strap. You'd probably still be quids in overall. Clearly, that isn't going to apply to absolutely every situation. Some watches with integrated bracelets will only fit very specific straps custom made by the brand, so therein lies one exception. The other, as hinted to in the heading for the section, is cost. If a watch is inexpensive and on a bracelet, you can almost guarantee that one of the areas where costs have been cut will be the bracelet itself. Famous brands operating in the budget sector like Seiko, Casio and Timex are infamous for their lower tier bracelets. So as a general rule, if I'm shopping at the bargain end of the market, I look for straps instead. Or at least models where you can change out the bracelet easily if you have to, as you can see with my Timex Q here. Obviously, it comes down to personal preference, but for me, I've never bought a mid-range or verging on expensive watch on a bracelet and ever thought about replacing it for a strap, whereas the opposite doesn't always ring true. With my Seiko Black series, I think the strap is actually the best part of the watch and I wouldn't dream of changing it. However, with my Citizen, it was only available on a strap to begin with and it isn't sized for Western wrists. I actually came very close to buying an entirely separate watch just to transfer the bracelet across. So from my perspective, I think it's wise to always buy on a bracelet and then go from there. Since Brexit, watch shopping in the UK at least has become more of a mathematical challenge, as you now have to consider import tax into the equation when buying from a lot more countries. The truth is, there are hundreds of thousands of retailers you can buy watches from online, and my advice is always to double check prices before buying anything. I would definitely extend that to buying watches in person as well. Nothing leaves a sour taste in the mouth quite like having a reminder every time you check the time that you overpaid, and sometimes significantly, for your watch. When it comes to shopping online, you need to think in terms of the total cost of getting the watch into your hands. That means the cost of the watch itself, import tax, shipping, and handling fees. To counteract all that, you're looking out for sales and discount codes wherever possible. To this day, I've only ever paid recommended retail price for one watch, and believe me, I've bought a lot. So it pays to shop around really carefully. To me, shopping for watches is one of the most fun parts of the hobby, so don't deny yourself a good hunt. The other piece of advice I'd give here is don't be afraid to look towards the second-hand market. I may be living a very blessed life with the statement I'm about to make, but I've had far more issues buying new watches that have quality control problems and have to be sent back than I have with buying second-hand watches. The one big exception to that statement wasn't actually down to the watch at all. When I use eBay, I tend to begin any search by looking at UK only listings to begin with, because that way I don't have to consider import tax, or at least so I thought. The issue I ran into is not checking carefully enough, as eBay includes the Channel Islands under UK listings, but you still pay import tax on them. Not a nice feeling to be charged on your doorstep when you weren't expecting it, I can assure you. It's fair to say that some watch brands enjoy far better reputations than others. And don't get me wrong, a lot of the time that is entirely justified. However, I think that can often obscure the point that sometimes even the best brands release a dud, and the worst brands sometimes release a gem. If they didn't, it would be hard to imagine how they stay in business after all. Now, what I'm about to say is obviously subjective. Beauty and value are in the eye of the beholder after all, but let me try and explain what I mean with a couple of examples. Invicta are perhaps best known in modern times for their gaudy and oversized models. There are some true horrors in their catalogue that surely only a mother could love, and for the life of me I don't know who is buying and wearing some of these. However, they also make the 1953, which, while hardly original, is actually a really well made, excellent value and particularly attractive homage. At the other end of the scale, Casio are a rightly celebrated, god-tier budget brand, with a litany of hits that others and myself simply cannot stop buying time and time again. At the last count, I think I'm up to 6 Casios in my collection, which far outstrips any other brand. However, they do also make things like the Frogman, which I know is fantastically durable, reliable and, under certain circumstances, useful, but is it really unlike some of the Invicta models in terms of the looks department? Of course, there will be people who see these models in the exact opposite light to me. That's why it's subjective after all. and that's why you shouldn't worry too much about what other people think of a brand. I would still advise you to look at reviews though. If the issues are to do with quality control or fundamental design problems, that's a different matter entirely. I recently made a video looking at fashion watches to see whether or not there were any out there really worth your time. It's perhaps ironic to say this after just having said not to worry too much about a brand's reputation, but I guess that is assuming that the brand actually makes watches. The first key piece of advice I would give is that if a watch specification is missing key details, unless it's from a really trustworthy brand, stay well clear. This is why I bring up fashion watches in particular. A lot of them have extremely limited specifications that makes it hard to know what you're actually buying. When it comes to materials, 316L stainless steel, sapphire crystal and a Seiko NH34 or 35 movement are not remotely expensive anymore. You will find these three things housed in models for around $100 on AliExpress. If you're looking at a watch and it doesn't tell you the case material, that's an alarm bell. If it doesn't tell you the movement, another alarm bell. Not all mechanical and automatic movements are made equally, and neither are quartz. And buying a watch with no knowledge of the reliability of the movement isn't likely to end well, as you can pretty much guarantee it will probably be the lowest cost available, and it's been designed to last until it's sold and not for life. A while back I was given the advice that to truly see whether or not a watch fits and suits you, you need to try it on and check your reflection in the mirror from 2 meters or so away. Sound advice, I thought, so I gave it a try. In that moment though, I realised I felt like I was trying on clothes. Makes sense, I thought, but normally that isn't something I would do. Maybe it's just me, but I quite literally couldn't care less about what other people think about my appearance. I have long hair, a scruffy beard, and I'm almost always wearing shorts unless I'm going to work. None of this is a fashion statement, it's just how I feel most comfortable. Now, I appreciate that some people will wear watches as a status symbol, and even I would try and match a watch style to the colour t-shirt I have on. But fundamentally, I think you should first and foremost buy what you actually like, and worry about how it looks to you on your wrist. Because one thing that you can guarantee to be true, you're always going to be the one who looks at it most. Buying something to impress someone else, especially if you don't actually like it yourself, is madness. If it's a more expensive watch you've got your eye on, my advice would be to try a cheap homage first to test the waters. I've done this with my Speedmaster Reduced, trying out the Moon Swatch in a couple of variants and the Pagani homage first, so I knew for a fact I'd love the real thing when I took the plunge. Now you might say that these purchases themselves could be classified as mistakes. I didn't keep any of them after all, but I look at them as stepping stones to make sure I don't make a far costlier error. Maybe this is akin to a form of torture, but I did also force myself to wear this Cadison Datejust clone for 5 months before I allowed myself to buy the real thing. Actually, as a testing ground, this proved invaluable as it made me realise I prefer a model with a smooth bezel over the famous coin edge. What I'm saying really is that sometimes a purchase you make, even if it doesn't stay with you for long, can still help you learn and grow. Watches have an inherent sell-on value, or you can keep them as a warning to your future self to remind you of what you like and what you don't. So compared to other mistakes you make in life, they usually aren't as permanent. You'll notice that I've avoided talking about individual models, styles, designs and colours in this video in terms of recommending you against them. And that's because really we're all unique and we like completely different things. It's my hope that this advice video is at least helpful to 1 or 2 of you watching. But I'd be keen to hear from you too in the comments. What other advice would you give when watch shopping? I'm sure there are other mistakes that I've overlooked, and perhaps some you've experienced that could even help me out personally. As ever, thank you for watching. If you've enjoyed what you've seen or found the advice useful, consider dropping the video a like and subscribing for more content like this.